Hello. I thought I'd read a chapter from the first chapter. This is a longer video. It's the first chapter from my book, The Voyage of the Sunship. I think I'm trying to encourage sales. It's hard being a new author breaking into this profession. When I write academic books, that's one thing, but when you write books that are more for entertainment, it's entirely different phenomena. All right, so I'm going to just read the first chapter. So enjoy, sit back, and relax as I read to you. Death, this is the chapter titled Death is a Start, Not an End. I had some great times as a young man in Washington, D.C. I recall one Halloween night walking from the George Washington University campus to Georgetown, marching along with a large column of people dressed in fun costumes. It was our annual takeover of Georgetown. This unfortunately doesn't happen anymore, to my knowledge, as there were too many negative consequences from a bunch of drunken and anonymous young people taking over M Street. We walked down the middle of M Street, ignoring oncoming traffic until cars could no longer pass. We closed M Street for all intents and purposes. We then proceeded to close the intersection of M Street and Wisconsin Avenue as well. Nobody was angry except perhaps the drivers who were now stuck trying to get home or to wherever they were heading. We were happy to celebrate, though, and didn't think much of the hindrances we were causing. I recall being there with a beautiful young New Zealand student I had a crush on. I remember asking her if she wanted to climb onto my shoulders to get a better view of all the fun people frolicking about. She declined. I felt a bit let down by her refusal, knowing that she didn't want me the way I wanted her. Still, we ended up having a really good time together that evening. I believe we ended up at a club on K Street by the Potomac River and marveled together at all the people wearing elaborate costumes. Neither of us dressed for the occasion. I was more interested in my friend seeing this event and sharing the moment with her. It's not often that people can take over an entire section of town, closing streets and partying freely. I think she was quite impressed. Those days were special. It seemed to me that anything was possible. I was studying at an expensive private university on a full academic scholarship. I was a good student, but I was living a double life, torn between academic achievement and poverty. I wanted so much to be a student and nothing more. However, when I left school to return home, I was reminded of poverty. My family lost everything when my father died. He left us with nearly nothing. I was unprepared to be the family's caretaker, nor did I desire to take on that role. I'm an American. I wasn't raised in South America or Eastern Europe. It wasn't my role or responsibility to care for others. As an American, I was taught to actualize myself. That's what I wanted to do, and I wouldn't let anything stand in my way. Success comes with sacrifice. Parents sacrifice everything for their children. My father came to this country from his native Argentina to find a new life, away from the poverty of being brown in Argentina. When I see people in Argentina now, it's mainly people of European ancestry, yet there are many non-white individuals there too. However, they are relegated to the periphery of society unless they are fortunate enough to possess great soccer skills, in which case they have a chance to live among the elite. My father was an enigma. He rarely shared much about his past, except for some experiences as a child growing up in a land of escaped Nazi war criminals. Indeed, my father told me of how he played with children of an escaped Nazi. I don't doubt it. During a visit to South America, I recall a trip to a beach in Lake Pucón in Chile. It was so odd to see everyone. It was so odd that almost everyone I saw there was blonde and blue-eyed. It doesn't take a genius to surmise the origin of the people I saw. Germans were everywhere, and they lived well, much better than the indigenous and mixed race people like my father. When my father came here, he landed in New York City. He recalled what he thought when he first saw snow. In his part of Argentina, it doesn't snow. He said he thought the ground was covered with cotton. He had to scramble to buy a coat as he wasn't prepared for the cold of a northeastern winter. He also spent time living in Miami before settling in Washington, D.C., my birthplace. Life wasn't too kind to him. Without a formal education, there was little he could do but labor. He did, however, have an ebullient personality. It's not surprising then that he was able to secure a job waiting tables. He also drove a taxi cab. Some of my earliest memories of my father are with him in a cab driving around the DC suburbs and stopping in parks to spread a blanket and eat lunch. We used to have a lot of picnics on weekend days. It doesn't seem that people have picnics so often anymore. Usually it's foreign transplants who still pack their food in large baskets and coolers and head for suburban parks. Perhaps it's more popular in other countries. Maybe it always was, as both of my parents were immigrants. Maybe that's all they knew. The years of labor and perhaps the exposure to various pathogens that working people endure finally caught up with my father. He started having a cough. At first, it seemed ignorable. With time, though, it started getting worse. He'd have bouts of uncontrollable coughing, the kind that seemed to rip your lungs out of your chest cavity, and you were left to scoop them back up and replace them from where they came. Then he started having cold fingers. The tips of his brown fingers would turn gray. Driving in the winter was hard for him, especially when the steering wheel was cold. Eventually, after many trials to figure out what was wrong, he finally learned that he had scleroderma and with it pulmonary fibrosis. No wonder he could hardly breathe. Eventually, oxygen ceased to travel to his heart. I remember vividly the day he finally lost his battle to survive. I was about to venture out for a long walk from our home on North Cleveland Street in Arlington, Virginia, to the mall in DC when my father started having a coughing spell. He was lying in bed with his oxygen on. He couldn't catch his breath. I ran to his bedside. He stared straight at me while holding out his hand, grasping desperately for life. I tried to respond, but had no idea how. Instead, I helplessly watched as the last morsel of life left his body. I was the last person he saw before he died. When major life events occur, we want to sit and take a break for a bit, regrouping for the stretch run ahead. When people die, however, there is no rest. Somebody must take care of the funeral arrangements. Someone has to take over paying bills. Someone must deal with the paperwork for life insurance and whatever else comes. I wasn't prepared for this, neither was anyone else in my family. My mother was a housewife who always did her best to take care of my sister and me. With my father, we were the only ones from the entire family living in the United States. Therefore, we had nobody else to lean on for help when things were bad. We did, however, have family on my mother's side who did help in some ways, but we needed much more. Although waiters can do well for themselves, it takes a lot more money than my father earned to take care of a family of four in this country. My father didn't plan well for life after his death. He had the smallest life insurance possible and no savings, whether it was mismanagement or a consequence of living in an economy that fosters debt. When he died, we had nothing but $10,000. That's a small sum to live on for people not used to taking care of themselves or managing funds. That money, of course, ran out soon after paying rent and other bills. My good reader, it's important to note that there's a big difference between working to keep oneself afloat and even thrive financially and working to keep a family secure. Things didn't work out well for us as a family financially after the money dried up. I did go to work, but I didn't make enough money to cover all our expenses. Plus, I was in college and had homework to do. I tried hard to balance both, but eventually my work hours interfered with my academic progress. My academic scholarship allowed for no more than 2 Cs during my studies. With all the hours working and my difficult course load as a statistics major, I earned a 3rd C and lost my scholarship. I did try hard to fight for it, but to no avail. I was out, and there was no way for me to continue my studies the way I had wanted to. People do make choices, though, and those choices have consequences. One of the 2 jobs I had was working for Western Union as a statistics intern. I loved the job as it was in DC's business district, and it made me feel special to dress nicely and head to a beautiful office building. My bosses really liked my work ethic and offered to pay for my education if I continue to work for them. So there was a plausible solution to my financial dilemma. However, there however, every offer has a catch. The catch was working for a boss whom I could not stand. This individual seemed nice, but her outward appearance hid a broken interior that couldn't accept reality despite hearing and seeing evidence contradicting her false beliefs. Jennifer was a former hippie who seemed to have rebelled against her former self to become a business nightmare. She used to ask me to complete tasks that would be easy to do in today's world, but were impossible in the mid 1980s. I recall her asking me to produce a figure for a meeting that the software I used could not generate. I used two statistical software packages, SPSS and SAS, both of which could communicate with each other using mainframes, but neither of which could produce what she wanted. For the youth reading this work, a mainframe was a large computer that allowed one to conduct work from stations. It's interesting how today a smartphone can do much of the work required much of what required a mainframe computer occupying a large room to do when I was younger. I used to spend hours at a station trying to do what she asked me to do. I'd let her know that what she wanted was not possible. She told me to try again. For some, getting paid to sit in front of a monitor doing nothing productive may be fulfillment, but not for me. I've always wanted to accomplish something with my life. I was accomplishing nothing. Thus, when another supervisor told me that the company would pay for my course if I stayed, I happily declined and went on my way. People make choices, and those choices have consequences. Now that I was out of school, I worked full-time at Hearthstone Exotics in Georgetown near the Key Bridge, which crosses the Potomac River into Roslyn, Virginia. Yet I was extremely motivated to matriculate at another institution. Prior to starting at George Washington, I was a student at the University of Maryland, College Park. I thought about returning there. However, looking at my situation and having people pressure me to give up on my dream of an education to take care of my family made me want to flee the area for good. I often say there are two plausible yet polar options when one confronts difficulties. One is to remain and fight hard. The second is to flee. Reading this book, you will see that in most situations I stayed and fought. However, this time fleeing was the best option for me. I wanted a fresh start where I wouldn't be burdened by so many obligations from my family. Plus, education in Washington, D.C. area has always been expensive. That's when I started my search that eventually led me to San Diego State University. I had to earn money first, though, so I dug into my work to earn as much money as I could on minimum wage and spent next to nothing on myself. That, my friends, is the first chapter of my book. And there's a lot more good stuff to come, including some bizarro twists that you should read about and you would enjoy. Okay, well, thank you for taking time to listen to this.